hppodcraft.com.
I am rolling. We are back.
We are. Are we?
Yeah, we are.
Oh, wow.
We're back in the third part of our 30-part series on the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath.
I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. I was just in the middle of a dream.
Yeah, what were you dreaming about?
I was dreaming about, I was visiting this old friend of mine who lived in a dreamland city of his own creation. His name was Kuranes.
Yeah.
Well, because see, I'm sort of on this quest. At least I think I was on a quest in this dream, and I was trying to find this beautiful golden city.
Yeah.
And there's lots of monsters and crazy things I've been going through, and I'm doing a really bad job of this.
Well, it sounds like you were your dream was eerily similar to the story that we're covering here on the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
Oh, at hppodcraft.com?
Let's stop being clever. I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And I'm Chris Lackey.
When last we left our listeners, Randolph Carter, our protagonist, as you said, he dreamed of a city that he wanted to visit.
Yeah.
He wasn't able to see it anymore in his dreams, so he decided he wanted to go to this place, Unknown Kadath, to talk to the Earth's gods, called the Great Ones, and say, hey, I want to see the city again. Nobody knows where Kadath is, so he's had to go through all kinds of trials and tribulations to get as far as he has. Right now, he's in the dream city of Celiphaeus, and he just spoke with the king of that place, Kuranes. Now, he knew Kuranes in life.
Yeah.
And Kuranes is now the king of Celiphae and a couple other dream places. And Kuranes has just told him, look, man, it's great that you want to go on this quest, but honestly, what you're really going to want at the end of the day is your own hometown of your youth.
Yep.
And Carter said, well, whatever, I'm going to keep going. So that's where we are.
Yep. We're in the city of Celiphaeus, where Kuranes rules. He doesn't actually live there anymore, but he lives near Celiphaeus, and he's waiting for some sailors that are from Ingonic, which is the place where he wants to go, because Ingonic is the land where the people that live there look like a statue that is supposedly a statue of the gods.
Right, it's a little complicated. But when he was in
complicated.
Celiphaeus before, he saw these sailors from Ingonic, and when he saw the face on the mountain, he realized that it resembled the sailors, so this is where he's got to go next, because if he can go where people look like that sculpture on the mountain, he knows the gods are nearby.
Yeah. And he also knows that in Ingonic, the onyx trade is a big deal, and that there's a lot of miners and stuff for onyx. So he starts doing a little research and finding out what it is to be an onyx miner. And he's getting a scheme in his head. I'm going to go there and pretend that I'm looking for onyx work.
Exactly, and that's pretty much what he does. When the sailors finally show up, he says, "Hey, I want to work in the onyx quarries. I'm an old onyx prospecting guy, and let me on your boat. Let's go back to Ingonic." And they believe him. Now, the reason he really does that is because he's afraid if he tells them what he's really doing, somehow subconsciously the Great Ones will find out, because these men are descended from them, and through some kind of, I don't know, cell memory or something. Psychic
link
stuff,
something.
Whatever. They'll figure it out. So he gets on the ship. He leaves Celiphaeus. He's in the boat with these Ingonic sailors, and gradually he gets them to talk a little bit about where they're from, their cold twilight land. And they say, you know, it's cool. The problem is we can't have cats. And my cat just meowed really loud in the back. They can't have cats there because the cats are freaked out by the desert to the north. As are the people who live in Ingonic. There's some kind of really terrible stony desert there.
And this is what he thinks might be this plateau of Lang that he has heard so much about.
And they also talk about the onyx quarries and how there is one quarry close to that desert where there are huge blocks missing.
Uh-huh.
And Carter knows that the palace that the gods live in is made out of onyx.
Yeah, but giant onyx stones that weren't cut by any human hand.
So maybe that's a clue. Well, they're sailing, and on their way to Ingonic, they pass this rock out in the water where something is howling. It's pretty terrible, and the sailors don't like it, and they sort of steer clear of it.
They stare, and he goes, "Wait, what's up with that?" And he goes, "We just don't go there.
Yeah.
We don't go to that.
It doesn't have a name. It hasn't been sought by any vessel because the sounds that come from it are terrible."
Yeah. We skip it. Moving on.
And they get to Ingonic, and it's all made of onyx, and it's pretty. And there's a tower there that they see as they're coming into port. It's the Temple of the Elder Ones, where people worship. Well, I don't know what goes on there. They worship the Elder Ones. It's the rhythm of the Great Ones they talk about. I don't know what it is. It says it's ruled by an old high priest, sad with inner secrets. That was a cool description.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you knew the things about the Lovecraftian universe, you would be sad too.
They pull into port, and there are these strange, slant-eyed slaves milling around, which he believes are from the Plateau of Lang, which I think is what he...
Yeah, he thinks that's going to be where the Onyx Temple is, the big temple that the gods of Earth live in.
Right.
Which is Kadath, basically.
They go into town, and I thought it was interesting. They go into this tavern after docking, where people are all getting drunk and telling stories and having fun, but whenever these sort of chimes and bells and horns and viols and voices rise from the tower, the Temple of the Elder Ones, everybody stops and bows their head.
Yeah.
It's almost like Saudi Arabia or something like that.
What? What do you mean that just the reverence of religion and God that the Saudis have? Is that what I mean?
Well, no. I mean, they'll have prayer times during the day, and they'll close shades in restaurants, and everybody has to stop what they're doing.
All right.
Wherever you are. So it's that kind of ancient civilization where those things are still very powerful.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. He's at the tavern, and he happens to see one of these slant-eyed people he recognizes. It's the old slant-eyed merchant that he had seen before in the taverns of Dileth Lane.
Right. Yeah, he had come with a yak caravan, and nobody knows from where, but he had all kinds of eggs that he likes to trade for jade goblets, and these eggs are supposed to belong to shantak birds.
Right.
I don't know what those are.
We don't know yet what they are. They haven't explained exactly what the shantaks, but supposedly they're great big birds.
People are a little freaked out by them.
Yeah, a little scared. They're a little scared.
The next morning, the captain takes Carter around to this. He gives him kind of a tour of the city, and he takes him around to the temple where they're hearing all the noise from. And all of these priests come out in lines with gold bowls that are steaming,
right?
And they kind of disappear into these other buildings. And I thought, well, those aren't priests; they're caterers. He just doesn't understand the situation at all. Caterers look very holy sometimes. They have the black outfits.
That's true. That's true.
Temple of Wolfgang Puck.
It's just a bunch of macaroni cheese that they're bringing in.
Man, macaroni cheese is so delicious.
It really is. So Carter wanted to know more about the temple and go in, but he's not allowed.
Right.
Yeah, it's only the veiled king is allowed to go into this. So he's like, all right, whatever. I guess I'm not going.
Yeah, and they pass the veiled king's palace, which is nice, and it's kind of dull. One thing that I thought was interesting is I know they keep an actual shantak bird in the king's palace, but they keep it in a dark room, and there's no light, so nobody's actually even seen it. They feed it in the dark, which makes no sense to me why they would keep it there and just feed it in the dark. It seems kind of cruel, actually, but
maybe shantaks like solitude and darkness.
True, maybe they do.
They're just weird alien creatures. They have their own, their own loves and hates and passions.
Well, at least it definitely contributes to a general atmosphere of weirdness that the king has a giant monster that he feeds in the dark, and I don't know what he gets out of that.
Yeah.
So Carter breaks with the captain at a tavern, and he starts to ask questions more about that desert to the north, under the guise of being this onyx, miner. And he gets a yak going. Rents a yak from Joe's yak rental, and he takes off for the quarries by himself finally.
And it takes a long time to get there. First, he gets to a small domed village called Urg, and the second night he camps out in the shadow of a large black crag. But on the third night, that's when things kind of start to happen.
Yeah, the third night he hangs out in a camp, right?
Yeah,
with a bunch of
quarry
miners
guys.
Quarry guys, yeah. And he tells them, "I'm prospecting for onyx." I just imagine that to trick him, you put on a big beard and a hat.
He wears one of those. He just wears those one bodysuit underwear, where it's one big long john.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's got suspenders, keeping his pants up. Yeah.
That's exactly how he's dressed right now. He tells them he's prospecting, and they say, well, don't go too far to the north. There's a lot of risks up there, but he ignores them, and he starts heading out that way. And he notices as he leaves that group that the slant-eyed merchant, who's been following him all along, shows up and starts talking to them. So he's kind of got a tail.
Yep, this guy's been following him for a long time.
He goes off north past some inhabited places and finally gets out to where it's pretty lonely, and then there's this hill that he abuses his yak up the hill. Well, I don't know. It says his yak was dubious, it says.
Well, yaks are known for their stubbornness, so you gotta really push your yak if you're gonna get it to do any real work for you.
Well, do you think he beats it, or do you think he just berates it?
Probably just says mean things.
You'll never amount to anything.
Exactly, and then the yak wants to go, well, I'll show you, and then just keeps going.
Well, he finds that quarry, that rumored quarry where the giant pieces of onyx are missing.
Yes.
He's there at that quarry with where all the big blocks are missing, cyclopean gouges in the earth.
Yes.
And he knows that this is where they dug up the onyx to build the Castle of the Great Ones. And as he's checking it out, his yak suddenly utters a cry and just runs.
Yeah, he gets spooked and he runs off. And so Carter
runs north.
Yeah.
Runs in the direction they were headed.
Carter chases
off after it. Yeah. And he hears some hoofbeats at one point, and he thinks that maybe it's his yak, but then he realizes those hoofbeats are coming from behind him.
Mm-hmm.
So something's after him, and as he's running, he sees something.
Yeah.
A giant mountain range. Sort of mountain statues.
Yeah.
It was kind of hard for me to figure out what exactly they were. Are they big, sort of mountainous heads?
Yeah, well, no, I think they're big, giant dudes because they're like reaching out, I believe it says. And
like they have their hands out holding you off or something.
Yeah, exactly. And he can see them only because they are backlit by the phosphorescent clouds.
Right,
so they're kind of silhouetted. So it's hard for him to really make out exactly what they are, but they seem like they're just giant statues. Like mountain-sized.
Giant warning statues.
Yeah.
Don't come here.
Exactly.
And then there's also something in there. Laps.
It was only the flickering light of the clouds that made their mitred double heads seem to move. But as Carter stumbled on, he saw arise from their shadowy laps great forms whose motions were no delusion. Winged and whirring, those forms grew larger each moment, and the traveler knew his stumbling was at an end. They were not any birds or bats known elsewhere on Earth or in dreamland. They were larger than elephants and had heads like a horse's. Carter knew that they must be the Shantak birds of ill rumor, and wondered no more what evil guardians and nameless sentinels made men avoid the boreal rock desert. And as he stopped in final resignation, he dared at last to look behind him, where indeed was trotting the squat, slant-eyed traitor of evil legend, grinning astride a lean yak and leading on a noxious horde of leering Shantaks to whose wings still clung the rime and nitre of the nether pits.
Yeah, so a group of these giant bird creatures that have horse heads. And later, one of the descriptions later, we find out they don't even have feathers; they have scales.
Ugh, the dragonish.
Yeah, they're like sort of like dragons, and they're huge. They're like elephant-sized.
Slant-eyed merchant jumps down from his yak and basically says, "You got to go where I take you, man. I got these birds as bouncers."
But through gestures, like he points, he's like, "You get on the bird," Right. And so Carter's like, "All right, I guess I got to get on this giant bird." And he,
yep.
He climbs.
There's nothing he can do about it. He's got to get on that bird.
Yeah, so he climbs on it, and the slant-eyed guy gets on the back behind him, and I assume that he puts his hands around his waist and
of course he does.
Puts his head on his shoulder behind him, and they hold each other very closely, and
they fly off.
They fly off, yeah.
Yeah, high over the mountains that block Inganak from Lang, and he sees caves in those mountains that remind him of the Night Gaunt caves he's seen before.
Right.
Foreshadowing there. And they fly over Lang, which is that cold desert plateau. That's Lang. Yeah. And I imagine, he says there's pipe music coming from there. There's a crotala.
Right. He sees dancing and fires. Yeah. There's dancing around these fires.
Yeah. There's these things. They leap weirdly and they look familiar.
They leaped as though they had hooves instead of feet, and seemed to wear a sort of wig or headpiece with small horns. Of other clothing they had none, but most of them were quite furry. Behind they had dwarfish tails, and when they glanced upward he saw the excessive width of their mouths. Then he knew what they were, and that they did not wear any wigs or headpieces after all. The cryptic folk of Leng were of one race with the uncomfortable merchants of the black galleys that traded rubies at Daileth Ling, those not quite human merchants who are the slaves of the monstrous moon things. They were indeed the same dark folk who had shanghaied Carter on their noisome galleys so long ago, and whose kith he had seen driven in herds about the unclean wharves of that accursed lunar city, with the leaner ones toiling and the fatter ones taken away in crates for other needs of their polypus and amorphous masters. Now he saw where such ambiguous creatures came from, and shuddered at the thought that Lang must be known to these formless abominations from the moon.
Whoa. Okay, so that one, we know what those merchants were all about. Those guys that kidnapped Carter.
So that horrible thing he'd seen when the turban came loose on his captor earlier was just some curly hair and a horn, right?
And horns.
Yeah.
Small horns. They have small horns on their head. Like I think from this description, to me, it sounds like they're sort of like satyrs or fawns. Like they've got hooven feet, they've got little tails, they've got horns on their head. But what this really tells us, and which I think is interesting, is that these guys know about the great old ones. They know about the great ones and the other gods. They're in. So when he started snooping around before, and when they kidnapped him, he was right. They were going to take him to the other gods or punish him or do something bad.
Right.
So this just confirms, oh wow, these guys are in more cahoots with the other gods than I thought. I mean, they live on the plateau of Lang.
Yeah, that's their hometown.
Yeah,
but they are being enslaved. I mean, they don't want to. I don't know if they want to work for the Moon Beast necessarily. This is confirmation that nefarious folks are working against Carter, and they have been the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine that it's almost like the Old West down there too, for some reason. Especially when you describe the percussive instruments playing, and castanets kind of sounds. I don't know, that whole landscape. I imagine is just this cold, gloomy. Looks like South Dakota in 1850 or something. So they fly over non-human landscape to the monastery of the man with the yellow mask. We've heard about him before. He lives in this windowless stone monastery. And we don't really know who he is.
No.
Yeah, but I think, Carter says, well, I think this dude had been behind everything, my earlier capture, and that I indeed had needed to go to Nyarlathotep. That's what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
Well, they go into the windowless monastery, and within it there are these hieroglyphics telling history. And he looks at the stories on the walls.
Oh, there's some cool stuff. I mean, there's some cool stuff. There's like frescoes and engravings and those types of things.
Yeah.
But he sees that the men of Lang fought purple spiders,
Right.
which I thought was
that's right.
really cool and interesting. And he also saw the Moon Beast set up a little base on an island. And like looking at the way the layout was, it's that island that he went by on his way to Unganik with those men.
Yeah.
That he heard that noise come from.
The Howling Rock.
With the Howling Rock. But he also discovers, which is a very pertinent fact, that Shantax are afraid of Nigons.
Yes.
Which at this point seems kind of like, that's an interesting tidbit that probably won't play into the story at all.
Yeah, it seems like everybody's afraid of the Nikons. But the frescoes also reveal that the almost humans, the pan fawns, they lived in this ancient city of Sarkomand.
Oh yes,
which is older than men. It says its ruins had bleached for 1 million years before the first humans saw the light. So this is where he had sent his ghoul buddies earlier.
Oh right, yes, the ruins of the city.
Sarkomand. Go find lost Sarkomand, and that'll be a way you can get home. And what he sees of the city is that there's this pair of winged colossal lions who guard this sort of subterranean staircase that leads down into some sort of massive abyss, great abyss from the dreamland. And that was sort of the centerpiece of that city. Sarkomand to me sounds like a Bond villain, doesn't it?
It sure does.
But, when he in that fresco where he says that the Shantax fear the Night Gaunts, it also says somehow in there that the Night Gaunts don't serve Nyarlathotep; they serve Nodens.
Yeah, and Nodens is one of the great ones. He's one of Earth's gods. Yeah. So it seems that's a little strange, but
I thought it was strange too, especially because it seems like everybody's afraid of the Night Gaunts, but that is their master. Which at least he knows. Well, Night Gaunts aren't gonna. They got their own agenda. They're not serving Nyarlathotep, who's been ruining my life lately as I've been on this quest. Nodens with the dancers that live in Lang, and with this Nodens comment, it really reminded me of the great god Pan.
Oh right, yeah. Arthur Machen.
Yeah, that's right. It has influenced a lot of Lovecraft's work, and I just recently read the story because you and I got some complimentary books.
Yeah.
From Bloodletting Press.
Yeah, they're really well done. Amazing book.
I was so pleased to get it. Larry Roberts over at Bloodletting Press sent us these books, and I read The Great God Pan, and it's an excellent story.
Yeah.
But there's touches of all sorts of Lovecraftian stuff in there. I mean, the first chapter really is just an early draft of From Beyond, I swear. And later, obviously Pan plays a part in that story, but also they find a description on a tree in there that makes reference to Nodens, the god of the Great Abyss, which I found interesting because the Night Gaunts sort of come from the abyss. I mean, they're the ultimate dark creature.
Right.
And Nodens is the sort of lord of that. So I don't know, found a connection there. But I also wanted to put a plug in for those books. We're going to put a link up on the show notes. They're so great.
Yeah, they're really cool.
And I think everybody should check out Arthur Machen because there's a clearly strong influence from his work to Lovecraft. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they go through past all these frescoes in the windowless monastery, and eventually they get into this great domed space where there's all these bas-reliefs and a huge pit in the middle, and some altars around. And the merchant forces him to walk up to the throne in the middle of the room.
Now, this, for the record, this room is completely dark. There's no light in there at all, and the only light comes from this lamp that the merchant is carrying, this land-eyed merchant.
And there on a golden throne sat a lumpish figure robed in yellow silk, figured with red, and having a yellow silken mask over its face. To this being, the slant-eyed man made certain signs with his hands, and the lurker in the dark replied by raising a disgustingly carven flute of ivory, in silk-covered paws, and blowing certain loathsome sounds from beneath its flowing yellow mask. He knew that the creature on the dais was without doubt the high priest not to be described, of which legend whispers such fiendish and abnormal possibilities. But he feared to think just what that abhorred high priest might be. Then the figured silk slipped a trifle from one of the grayish white paws, and Carter knew what that noisome high priest was. And in that hideous second, stark fear drove him to something his reason would never have dared to attempt. For in all his shaken consciousness, there was room only for one frantic will to escape from what squatted on that golden throne.
What is it? When the mask goes aside, he realizes what it is.
Yeah, it's not.
He doesn't share that with us.
No, it's probably something so horrible that it can't be described.
Whew. Carter goes all action hero at that point.
Yeah, he freaks out, hauls ass, and charges into the slant-eyed man and knocks him in the flippin' big pit that's in the middle of the ground.
Carter, hitherto wholly passive, now gave that man a terrific push with all the wild strength of fear, so that the victim toppled at once into that gaping well which rumor holds to reach down to the hellish vaults of Zin, where gugs hunt ghasts in the dark.
Good job, Carter. Finally.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
He grabs the lamp and he runs back off through the temple.
And he gets lost, and his
right. He goes the wrong way. In retrospect, he says, maybe I should have followed those frescoes because I could have,
But he's a little freaked out. You got to cut him some slack here, because, I mean, he just saw what's behind the yellow mask, and it ain't something that you can deal with easily.
Right.
So he's
I have to say, at this point, though, it was a pretty easily done escape.
Yeah, it was.
You know? All this time and effort and energy to get him here in front of this guy with the yellow mask, and he just pushed his guide over and ran, and they couldn't catch him.
Yeah, that's it.
I was reading an article that somebody had written about Lovecraft where they said, he writes about things that are indescribable and horrible and so terrible that if you even look at them, you go crazy, but he also has the most easily defeatable monsters in all of horror. They're really not tough to break down. Like Cthulhu, you drive a boat into his belly, and that's it.
Now, hey, wait a minute. In Cthulhu's defense, he's not gone. His manifestation just kind of pops, and then he reforms.
I know. I thought it was a funny notion that
absolutely
there are other examples which I won't get into.
I'm with you. I get what you're saying, but I'm just going to say, hey, look, don't mess with Lovecraft.
Yeah, hey man, I'm on your side. I agree. I thought that was you know what? In fact, the guy that said that, screw him. His argument was just as easily defeated. I just turned on him. He's not followed, and he's groping around in the dark trying to find a way out.
And he all of a sudden starts falling. He groping around in the dark, he missteps, and he's sliding down a slope to like a tunnel. Yeah,
it's like straight down this burrow that he just falls into. And I think he said it seems to take hours for him to fall. Lovecraft loves that. Everything takes hours around here. So he's just falling and falling and falling and falling.
It reminded me of Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey when they... Do you remember when they go down to hell and they're screaming the whole time, and then they just get tired of screaming?
They get kind of tired, yeah.
And they start screaming again, and then they start playing 20 questions.
Well, he eventually lands in the ruins of Sarkomot, which is what is down this burrow.
Yeah.
And he can see there's these phosphorescent clouds down there that help him see the ruins. I kind of thought it was like Las Vegas, like Venice or Caesar's Palace, where they have this sort of fake clouds up in the ceiling. So 3 a.m, it feels like the middle of the day. That's what Sarkomot looks like.
Yeah, okay. That's not exactly what was in my head, but I'll let you have that one.
Well, he's screwed, man. There's nowhere to go. He's down there in the ruins of Sarkomon. He can't go back through Lang because there's too many folks looking for him. Below are the ghouls and the gugs and the ghasts if he decides to go further down.
Yeah.
And that's no good. He doesn't have a boat to sail with, so he's just sort of stuck.
Yeah, well, he is. And so he kind of starts wandering around, and he sees some campfires. Right. He sees some light, so he sees there's somebody, some kind of civilization, something's going on. And he realizes that these campfires are near the shore, so he's by a big body of water. And when he gets closer to kind of see what's going on, he sees that docked on the shore, or near the shore, is one of the black galleys from the moon.
Yeah. And he gets all stealthy when he hears a ghoul crying.
Yeah.
He sneaks around and he looks and he sees that it's his boys.
Yeah,
and they are being tortured by the moon beasts. They're torturing them.
Flipping moon beasts.
They're basically heating up spears and they're just laying them against the prisoner's flesh.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah, these guys are definitely bad, these moon beasts. Before I thought they were, maybe they're just misguided, but no, they're plain evil.
Now, Carter can't do anything about it because there's too many moon beasts.
Yeah, there's way too many moon beasts. He can't deal with this. So he remembers, looking at those frescoes, that there's an entrance down where night gaunts live in Sarkomon.
Yeah, all right. So this is one of those times where first I'm hearing of something. Carter goes, well, there's some more ghouls I could go talk to below here. And I know that the ghouls have treaties with the night gaunts. And Pickman actually has taught me to glibber out a password that will allow the night gaunts to know that I'm
with them.
Cool with the ghouls. This is the first I'm hearing of it. The ghouls have a treaty with the night gaunts?
Remember that the night gaunts brought stuff in and threw them in this pit.
Yeah.
Which was near the night gaunt. No, I'm going to say, it doesn't make any sense, yeah.
Look, I think that it's one of those things where he was writing this and he went, what would be great is if there was a treaty here, and that's how I'll move forward. And then normally he would have gone back into the story near the beginning and justified it somehow, but he just never got around to it or something.
Right.
Because it really does come out of nowhere.
Well, when I first read it, I thought it made sense, without really thinking about it, because the night gaunts brought people into that big place where they threw bones. But if the ghouls are throwing bones into that place, then it's not useful to them. It's really for the bulls.
Yeah.
So you're right. It doesn't really make sense.
Because he was pretty scared the first time they picked him up and started flying him around.
Yeah, absolutely.
He didn't think then, well, I'll just glibber this password and they'll leave me alone. Because he could have done that. Well, anyway, I accept it. Suspend my disbelief. He heads over to the lions, those two lions that he'd seen in the fresco, because there's a pit between them that he can descend to go see some ghouls. It says he manfully persisted toward those lions. Which, you know what? He is a pretty manful guy. I mean, he doesn't take any crap from anybody. He doesn't fear anybody.
No.
He has moments where he's a little worried about things, but mostly he's just worried because he can't get any closer to his quest or he's getting off course.
Right.
He's a really strong character. I mean, he's different than a lot of Lovecraft protagonists in that he shows up and he's like, all right, here's what's going on. You guys start a war. Beat that zebra. Let's go. He's a lot like, and we didn't talk about this too much before, but he's a lot like John Carter, the Edgar Rice Burroughs character.
Oh yeah, which is definitely something Lovecraft had read.
Yeah, and a lot of people would actually say that this story is in fact sort of a rip of Edgar Rice Burroughs' Mars series.
Yeah,
where John Carter, because John Carter doesn't actually even take a spaceship, he lays down and he sort of psychically travels up to Mars.
Travels to Mars, yeah.
Same kind of thing. He shows up, he puts together a bunch of armies, he manfully persists through lots of obstacles, and there's all sorts of different monsters that he allies himself with, etc.
Right.
But I did have a copy of John Carter of Mars since I was a little kid. It was like a 1960s copy, hardcover, and when I was a teenager, I hollowed it out, and that's where I kept my cigarettes. Every time I see the name John Carter of Mars, I just think about that book on my bookshelf. That's where I hid stuff. Yeah, isn't that terrible?
That's
nice book,
I had no
too.
idea that you hid cigarettes.
Ian John Carter Mars.
Yeah, hopefully your mom isn't listening to this particular episode of the podcast. She will be mortified.
Oh no! He goes down into the gulfs. He goes for hours. Actually, he's descending this pit, climbing, and at some point he feels himself. It's almost like the transition is very dreamlike. He's suddenly being carried. He's not down there anymore, and it's a night gaunt.
They got him.
Picked him up.
Yep.
So he meeps out a password to them, and the night gaunts are suddenly, they're cool.
They start taking him back to Pickman.
They put him down among the ghouls. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was a little confused about the geography. So is the ghoul world just under everything? I mean, it doesn't matter where you are.
I think it's connected to everywhere through the underground. You know, it's sort of like there's, you know, how there are warrens and passageways and secret underground things that can get you from one place to the other. And I think that sort of ghouls are everywhere. They sort of infest everything because anywhere there's dead things, that's where they go. So that's just the impression I got. There's nothing. I can't really concretely back that up. That's just that's more of a feeling I get when I read it. So
it's happening in the story. They went down the abyss. The Night God snatched him up. They dropped him off with the ghouls. He gets it going right away. He tells him, this is what's going on. Our buddies are up there being tortured. More ghouls assemble. More Night Gods show up. Yeah. Everybody's getting mad, you know. It's sort of like the Warriors or something like that. And
it's a little ghoul army, and then all of the ghouls get on the backs of Night Gods.
Yeah. They decide that they're going to go to war. They assemble an army, which people are doing all the time in this story. Why not?
Yeah, why not?
And they head back up the plaza with, the Night Gods carrying them up to the Great Stone Lions, and they get ready to attack. And I think that would be a good place for us to pause right now.
Yeah.
There's going to be another war that's completely Carter's fault in the next episode, our concluding episode of the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath.
Just, folks, get ready for some Night Gone action, because there's going to be a lot of it.
Yeah, and it's going to be sexy.
What?
Hey, what? Nothing. Hey, I also, once again, want to thank our excellent reader, Lance Holt, for once again, knocking it out of the park. It's been really fun doing these stories with him as a reader.
Yeah, he's great, and just very talented, and all around great at setting a mood, so keep it up.
And with that, I am Chad Pfeiffer.
I'm Chris Lackey.
And this has been the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
At hppodcraft.com.
hppodcraft.com